So Matteo, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about secrets to your style of playing guitar. So perhaps you can share with us the first key element to your style of playing guitar.
Yeah, the first one, I think it's what most people are curious about, and it's for sure the right hand technique. And it's really connected to the tone, because I get a really different tone from the pick, of course. And the first thing I noticed when I started playing guitar is, of course, I started when I was 10 years old. And I started immediately with fingers, so I didn't start with a pick, and then I switched to fingers. But when I started without nails. So the sound was really muddy and dark, only with the flash. So I realized immediately that in order to have my kind of sound, you need to have nails, first of all. So that's how I developed my technique. I really have kind of two positions. One of them is the bass-like technique. And I play in this position when I want to do like more scale approach. And then when I switch to chords, I play the other technique. So and of course, for some type of arpeggios, I also use this kind of technique because I have the thumb available. So it's like having 4 different picks in a way. So it's a mix of both these two techniques, basically. And what I get is, with the nail, you have the attack that maybe you have with the pick, but at the same time, you have like a darker tone because there's also the flash of the finger. So that's what I do, basically, and it will be my first choice, I think, to my first secret, let's say, to my playing. I mean, there are no secrets. I didn't invent this technique. Is a good mix of like bass technique and classical style that I learned when I was a teenager. So it's just rare to see it on the electric guitar, but I always say that I didn't invent this technique. Like Van Halen never said that he invented tapping, you know? He just put it on the rock roll side of things. So I see it like in a similar way, let's say.
Are you playing all upstrokes with your fingers, or do you play downstrokes sometimes as well with the nail?
I think it's all upstrokes, basically. The thumb is a downstroke because it's on a different position. So it's a mix of both, basically. So because of that, things that are maybe scalar things that goes up to the neck are simple when I play like that, because I do kind of a rake thing, like and I do it with my index finger most of the time. When I have to like go on this way, let's say, on the instrument, I use the other technique because it's simpler to change the string, basically. So if you want to, let's say, do a string skipping run, my first choice will be this kind of technique. So it's a mix of both, depending on the line.
Do you prefer to kind of strike each note with a finger, or do you play legato more often? How do you approach kind of single note playing?
I think it's a mix of both. It depends on the sound and even the sound you have. Of course, when I play clean, it mostly pick notes, like with fingers. When I play with distortion, I have a more legato approach because, of course, you have more sustain. And of course, it depends on the sound you want to achieve. Like, for example, the jaw pass kind of sound is very with the pick. And on the other hand, if you want to achieve an Alan Allsworth kind of sound, you have to do legato more. So it depends on the sound you want to achieve, of course. The second one will be, it's kind of a thing that I worked especially with the classical guitar. I learned it through the classical world. And it's basically economy of motion, especially for the left hand. So I realized, especially for the type of lines I wanted to do, that if you have like an elegant motion, especially for the left hand, things will be easier. So I always try to not stress out my left hand too much. So especially for the electric guitar, you don't need too much strength on the left hand. So whenever I do a line, even if it's like complicated, whenever it is, I always try to not move my left hand too much. So it's always a matter of balance, as always. And like for the legato thing, for example, I always try to, of course, have strength and volume, but at the same time not press too much on the fretboard. So I, of course, worked a lot on that, and I think classical guitar helped me a lot to achieve this kind of movements, especially because you work a lot with chords with classical guitar, because you do a lot of solo pieces. With the electric one, it's a different thing, but it's actually really connected. You know, if you have a really strong left hand, this thing will come naturally with time, but of course you have to work a lot on it.
How do you use your little finger? Do you kind of keep it one finger per fret, or do you use it more flexibly?
I kind of use it one finger per fret, mainly because I have a small hand, so my pinky finger is a really useful tool. And for those that have, like the people that have big hands, they can also play with just these three fingers sometimes, and you can see it on a lot of guitar players. But for myself, I think having an extra finger is really useful, especially for chords, you know. This type of chords, you need to have like a strong pinky finger. And of course, I try to use it also on my lines. Sometimes it's better to use just these three. Sometimes it's better to use four. It really depends on how far the stretch it is. And of course, if it is a big stretch, like this kind of line, of course, you need to use your pinky. Otherwise, I can't reach that note with just my three fingers, you know?
And in terms of, do you incorporate much bending in your work, or not so much? You prefer kind of linear kind of playing?
No, I incorporate bending, especially when I'm playing with the distortion type of sounds. When I play clean, I always like to, you know, do a bend every now and then. But of course, it depends on the style. If I feel like the bending is in the right place, let's say, I will do it. And of course, I work a lot on the intonation. I started as a blues rock player, so the bending was like the first thing I learned, basically. You know, a lot of tunes like if you don't have a good bending, you can't really play this kind of tunes, you know? of course, all the bluesy stuff, the classical blues elements. I worked a lot on this kind of phrasing. Yeah, that's a really useful tool, not only for blues rock players, for every kind of style. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you like to keep your left hand technique quite light. How do you have your guitar set up? What strings do you use, and how do you have the action?
Yeah, these are tens. I mostly use 1046. I don't really like nines because they feel too thin, especially for the right hand. So tens are usually the strings I use the most. I sometimes use I mostly use Doggle strings. These are my strings. They are Italian strings made in Venice. And right now I'm using the nickel steel. It's my favorite set. But yeah, the first choice will be always stands for my type of playing. Yeah. Third secret will be, it's not really a guitar thing. It's more like a musical thing. I always said that I don't want to consider myself a rock player or a jazz player or a blues player, but I just love to play guitar. So most of the people, especially guitar players, they tend to, think about styles in separate ways, and not like good music and bad music, because these are just the two main categories for me. So in order to be a good musician, you need to be a good listener first. So that would be my advice for not only guitar players but musicians in general. And that's how you become your true self, because if you isolate yourself only on blues or only on jazz, let's say, you really missed a lot of opportunities, That's why I like players that are really open. People like, Scott Anderson, for example, is one of my favorite players because he has a really strong blues background, rock blues background, but he is also a jazz guy, and he has a lot of jazz vocabulary in it. So that's the beauty of the guitar, is that you are able to go through different places and taking what you want and what you really like. So don't listen only to guitar players, of course. Listen to music where the guitar is not the main protagonist, will be helpful for this kind of mindset. So yeah, that would be my third advice. Yeah.
Do you like to take licks or phrases from other instruments and sort of try and make them work on guitar?
Yeah, I took a lot of licks from different players, guitar players especially, of course. But when I was at the conservatory, at the music school in Palermo, I learned a lot just by listening other players, like sax players or piano players. And that's really where I began to develop my jazz vocabulary, especially. So this helps you to think about the guitar in like in a diverse way, let's say, because if you only listen to guitar players, you will come up only with guitaristic things, let's say. So good advice would be, listen to different soloists, especially the sax players, because it's a monodic instrument. They work a lot on their phrasing and their improvising skills, for example. So, a lot of so not all these lines are from guitar players, of course, like so it's really a mix of sax players, piano players sometimes, and this kind of lines, like fourth intervals, for example, are really good. They sound really good for me, and sometimes I don't see guitar players often use this kind of lines because the fourth interval is really hard to play on the guitar because it's on the same fret, But actually, a lot of sax and piano players especially use this kind of technique a lot. So that's where I took it, and also I took it from Frank Gambale, for example. That Frank himself said that he took it from piano and sax players, so everything is connected actually. So that's where is the fun thing for me, taking sax, piano stuff, or other instrument in general, and try to translate them on the guitar. It's a fun thing for me.
And I know you, as you say, you don't just draw from jazz, you draw from rock and blues and everything. That's really important to you. But just whilst we're talking about jazz briefly, which jazz players do you admire the most?
Because of my father, I came to listen a lot of jazz players because my father is really into jazz. And thanks to him, I kind of got back in time, and I started with, the classic traditional rock stuff like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, of course. So my first influences were this kind of guys. And then with my father, I got back in time and I listened to Django, Wes Montgomery, Barney Kessel, of course. And most of my first jazz vocabulary came from like transcriptions of these players, for example, like the classic Wes Montgomery line. So this kind of lines, Joe Pass, for example, was a big influence, especially for the start, and a lot of the chromatic things I learned also are from this kind of world. So this kind of lines, I learned them through all these listenings, and of course Django as well. So it's like a mix of the first ones, and then of course I came to know a lot of sax players as well. And really the jazz influence was also on the composition side of things. Pat Metheny, for example, is one of my favorite composer, other than being an exceptional guitar player, So yeah, thanks to my father, I had the chance to listen a lot of different things from the start. So yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because if we go back in time to, 1967, 1968, when Eric Clapton was in Cream with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, they had a real jazz background. And I do wonder if today that kind of knowledge of jazz is kind of a little bit missing from some people's approach to rock, and because it kind of extends your harmonic kind of picture, if you like, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you are interested in it, you can find, a lot of source material. Like now there are no excuses. You have internet, you have Instagram, you have everything. And so if you want to learn more about jazz, it's there, it's on the phone. You can have it everywhere you want, anywhere you want, So I think it's a matter of choice. If you want to be, if you are a curious person, I think you cannot ignore that jazz background, because it's part of our culture, especially. So especially the American culture, jazz is basically the one of the greatest inventions by the Americans. So I think if you are curious where the influence from your idols actually come from, you will eventually discover jazz. So it's kind of go back in time and see what happened. And I actually think about, when I'm thinking about, innovations, the thing I always say is, in order to innovate, you have to know the past. So you will actually know what happened and why we are on this kind of music now, So you have like an historical order of what happened, and you have a clear idea also what kind of music you want to make, I don't see a lot of players listening to jazz right now, but there are a few players that listen to it, and I immediately know if they, listen to that. And actually, they are the players I prefer. If they have a good jazz background, they are actually my favorite players most of the time. Yeah.